The stage partnership has been funded by the Tampon Tax Fund between January 2019 to March 2021 to provide trauma-informed support for women in North East and Yorkshire who have been groomed for sexual exploitation. In recognition of the fact that a lack of adequate response to this problem is systemic, the stage partner organisations came together not only to demonstrate how best practice can be delivered in different locations, but also to influence policy. So, without further ado, to tell you more about that, I'm now going to hand over to the stage partners, Joanna, Moya, Laura and Rokaiya, who are going to share some of their experiences of taking part in the partnership. And just a reminder to participants to do please post your questions in the chat function as presenters are talking, and we will come back to those after the presentations. Okay, Moya, I think you are going to kick us off. Oh, you're muted, Moya.
It's so inevitable.
Absolutely, it wouldn't be a Zoom event without.
It certainly wouldn't, no. So my name's Moya Woolven. I'm CEO at Basis Yorkshire, which is a medium-sized charity based in Leeds, but some of our young persons work also covers Hull and Bradford. Our goals are to end stigma, create safety and promote empowerment. And we've been operating for over 30 years, initially to support on-street sex workers in Leeds. This work led us to developing our Young Persons Project to support girls and young women who were experiencing child sexual exploitation or at risk of becoming exploited. The work then expanded to include boys and young men, as well as adult women who have either experienced sexual exploitation or abuse as children or who continue to be sexually exploited. And we continue to support sex workers, whether they work on street or indoor, whether that be as independent escorts, through agencies or in brothels or massage parlours. We also have developed a training arm to support professionals both locally and nationally, sharing our expertise and knowledge around child exploitation, as well as working with sex workers, and have been delivering courses since 2015. So for us, one of the positives of working with the stage partnership is that the work has helped highlight the same systemic nature of the issues that each individual organisation is tackling across different geographic locations. I think we all had a feeling that this was the case, but now we have the actual evidence to show that many of the systems that we're trying to engage with just don't work for the women and girls that we are supporting. And we're able to raise those issues together, which gives us a much louder voice. I think one of the challenges is, as often is the case, around future funding for this important work. I think it's an issue for all of us, and plans to start approaching potential funders at an earlier stage have been scuppered by the pandemic. I think we've all recognised through the work that we've been doing, both within the stage partnership and prior to it, the need for long-term support for women and girls who have experienced trauma, as well as the importance of consistency. And this is difficult when longer-term and sustained funding is hard, if not possible, to come by. Hence the importance of the influence group, which includes MPs and others, to really focus on the amount of need that there is and what's required in terms of support and raise these issues in Parliament and the House of Lords on our behalf. So larger charities may be in a position where they can redeploy staff and ensure that women are still supported, but this is often not the case for smaller charities. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Moya. Rokaiya, I think we're passing on to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So welcome everybody. My name is Rokaiya Khan. I'm the Chief Exec at Together Women. Together Women has been delivering services for the last 14 years in Yorkshire and Humberside, primarily set up post the Corsten report to support women experiencing kind of being affected by criminal justice. So we set up a number of women's centres to provide kind of trauma-informed, holistic, one-stop shop service. Our support services have expanded quite hugely in terms of working with women with multiple complex needs, and as an organisation we've grown to deliver services across a much wider geographical patch. I would consider ourselves as a kind of medium-sized organisation. We have around 60 members of staff, £1.6 million turnover, and our organisation is supported by over 70, 80 volunteers every year, who play a really big part in kind of the work that we do with the women. I think the organisation covers the whole kind of spectrum in terms of early intervention support, right from kind of supporting women and girls at a very, very, very sort of young age in terms of kind of school and stuff, right through to supporting women who have experienced long periods in prison and who are being kind of released back into the community. So kind of we cover a big spectrum in terms of support. When the opportunity came up to be part of this partnership to look at how we could collectively work together as organisations to do some targeted work around supporting women who have experienced CSE, I think one of the big things for us was the organisations involved. I mean, we all work in partnership, and I think one of the things that really struck out for us was the fact that the organisations involved in this partnership very much shared a very similar ethos and values in terms of what we do and how we deliver services. And I think at the heart of it, there was a real strong commitment to really working with women and girls in a trauma-informed way and approach in terms of delivering services. And I think that was kind of one of the things that really attracted Together Women to be part of this partnership, that really stemmed from kind of very small local organisations to quite large organisations, and we, I think, sit within the kind of middle within that sort of partnership. One of the real positives, I think, for us has been how we enable kind of all leaders from these organisations to collectively make strategic decisions and how we work collaboratively together. And I think that we've done that really successfully in lots of ways, and particularly around kind of the collective voice and the influencing locally, regionally and nationally, and that's been a real positive. But I think it's also been a challenge as well, challenge ensuring that the voices of the smaller organisations are heard. And I think also it's been a challenge for the larger organisations to ensure that people kind of feel involved and how we collaboratively, strategically work together as leaders. And I'm sure kind of some of the other speakers will touch on that, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. Joanna.
Hi, my name's Joanna Jones. I'm the CEO at Grow in Rotherham. We've been an organisation operating delivering services since 1988. We originally set up to support women to get involved with youth and community work. And it was actually the women who said to us they wanted more than that, their needs were more than that. So we've developed over the last 30 years to where we are now as a trauma-informed delivery service, with specialisms in supporting women and girls experiencing CSE and sexual exploitation. The service users, the women who come through the service, have often multiple and complex needs. They've been involved in many different organisations and services agencies over their life, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, and often worry around engagement with services. So we spend a lot of time building relationships. We've been delivering trauma stabilisation work, trauma and resilience work now solidly for a good 3 to 4 years, and we've really seen a difference in terms of what that approach can make. We work with girls from 13 upwards into adult women. Well, there's no end age on that. But we have got some younger girls in that, because we found the gap over girls who'd experienced child sexual abuse. So we had to extend our service to include 9-year-olds and upwards, which again is still a gap in support services in Rotherham. In terms of how we've extended over the years, we now deliver services for the Ministry of Justice, for women in the community, in criminal justice system, and we deliver that in Barnsley as well, which is our next door neighbour in South Yorkshire. And again, we're able to then use the trauma stabilisation approach in Barnsley as well. The positives, I think, of being involved in this partnership, ditto what Rokaiya and Moya have said, really, that the opportunity to work with the larger charities, as grows the smallest charity in this partnership, has been massive for us in terms of learning and sharing resources, but also being able to link in and understand how they've developed and grown themselves. That's been very, very beneficial. I think another positive for us has been around the fact that as the smallest charity, that we've also felt that other organisations have had things to learn from us as well, in terms of our knowledge base around the CSE work, what we've developed over the last decade. Being part of the National Influencing Group, being part of a national voice, again, we can't do this locally. We can only do it to a level, and what we all recognise is that if we don't get changes upstream in government, we aren't going to make a difference, you know, in the legacy of this project. So being involved in the national voice work for women experiencing exploitation has been great. I think some of the difficulties have been around, we are a small charity, we don't have the same capacity as some of the larger charities to be involved in everything, attend everything, and turn things around. But I think there has been always attempts to try to address that balance. And again, looking for future funding, it seems that, you know, we've all been hit by a pandemic, but actually the opportunity to have carried on and develop further and build for new partnerships could be and still will be, hopefully, massive. So it's been a really good experience.
Joanna, thank you. And last but not least, Laura.
Hi everyone, lovely to be here. So I'm from Changing Lives, and we're a large charity. We support people, I guess, during really challenging times in their lives, such as homelessness and addiction, people with contact with the criminal justice system, and specifically relevant for this, we support women generally who've experienced abuse and exploitation. And we have services across the North and Midlands supporting women who sell sex and involved in survival sex and experiencing sexual exploitation. We've been going 50 years, this our birthday this year actually, and we work across the country, but our roots are very much embedded in the North East. We've got nearly 700 staff, 200 volunteers, and a turnover of 27 million. So we are, I guess, especially within this partnership, considered a really large charity. But I think, and I hope, our sort of ethos is, you know, remains very true to who we are. In some ways, I think we see it as immaterial, sort of what door, whether someone comes through homeless services, addiction services, women's services. Really, what we hope to achieve is that we're a transitional space where people can be supported to resolve and recover to what's happened, because regardless of what door people walk through, really people come to us because they've experienced trauma, deprivation and discrimination. And I think that's just sort of central to what we do. I think, you know, this partnership has been amazing for us and just such huge learning, and nevermore, you know, as Joanna said, you know, the learning is just, I think, all around us and just mutual and constant. we saw some cases around grooming for sexual exploitation just kept coming, and they weren't even getting media attention after a while. And so I think for us, it was around the power of our voice collectively to say, this isn't about pockets of local poor practice. This is, you know, a systemic problem, and that's really key. But as a larger organisation, I think the learning for us just can't be underestimated. We submitted the bid because we have a business development team, and that's what comes with being large. And I think from the start we were aware of the power imbalance that brings. You know, we've got lots, you know, in this room, and you know, lots of partnerships working with smaller organisations. It's in our strategy as a charity that our role and responsibility is to try and support a really diverse and thriving sector, so not to compete with small specialist partners. But I think this experience has taught us something much deeper than that, really. It's not just about sort of, you know, good partnership and, you know, being in partnership. I think it's taught us about what sharing power really means if we're going to do it properly. And so much of this is about capacity. So because we're large, we have a comms team, we have a policy manager, a business development team, a finance team, whereas most of the chief execs in the, you know, in the partnership are doing all of that themselves. And so I think what we wanted to do is make sure we're bringing that capacity into the partnership to help us, free us up to sort of get on with what we really want to be doing. But I think within that, there's a real inherent tension, because it kind of inherently therefore just gives us more power because we're doing those things. And it's a constant balancing act, really, to make sure we're not taking decisions on behalf of others, and it's not disempowering, at the same time as we're not overloading everybody who is really, really has so much more of a capacity this year, but possibly than us, with sort of emails going, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And it's really weighing that up, because there is an inherent, you know, power imbalance that we have to acknowledge with all of this. So for me, it's about us really properly understanding that and listening and learning, and keep learning about what's helpful, what's not helpful. And we still get it right. You know, I still, like a couple of weeks ago, one of the partners rang up and was just like, look, we're inundated. You know, we had this webinar, we've got influence group strategy, we're being inundated with emails, and we still have to keep learning that that's too much, but then at the same time making sure we're all included, and we're all absolutely, we just try and break down the power imbalance as much as we can. So for me, it's about very consciously and continually listening and talking and thinking about what it really genuinely means to share power. Thank you.
Laura, thank you very much. And finally, Rokaiya and Moya have very kindly offered to just reflect back some insights from our partners that couldn't be here today, A Way Out and Women's Centre. Moya, do you want to go first?
Thank you. Yes, I've just got some notes, so I'll make sure that I can see those. So I'm talking about A Way Out, which is a charity that's based in the Northeast. It's an outreach and prevention charity which aims to engage, empower and equip vulnerable and excluded women, families and young people to live lives free from harm, abuse and exploitation, and to reduce life-limiting choices and behaviour. They have 4 distinct programmes of work providing services to disadvantaged, vulnerable and socially excluded groups. So there's the Liberty Project, which is an outreach, engagement and recovery service for adult women with complex needs who are drug and alcohol dependent and socially isolated and involved in on-street sex work. The Blossom Project, with young women aged 13 to 24 who experience multiple disadvantages, to build emotional resilience and to encourage positive life choices with the aim of preventing young women being vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. The Youth Project works with children aged 8 to 12 years, providing a safe environment which children experiencing social and emotional difficulties can learn new skills and practice positive behaviour. And there's also a family project which works with the whole family in an intensive and motivational way, supporting and empowering disadvantaged families to discover new skills and confidence, and to build resilience to affect sustainable and positive change. So the positive, one of the many positives that A Way Out have found in working as part of the stage partnership is the opportunity again to amplify the voices of the women that A Way Out works with, and enable these women to influence policy and practice beyond their own local communities. I think this is something that's been reflected by all of us this morning in what we've said. One of the challenges for A Way Out has been around overcoming the tendency to see something purely as a partnership of big and small organisations, instead of focusing on what is beneath this in terms of the collective expertise and resource made available. And I think that's something that that Laura's touched on around our abilities as smaller charities to have the resource to fully engage as much as we would want to and like to, and how we sort of work through that. So that's what Sarah had to say from A Way Out. Thank you.
Thank you, Moya. And Rokaiya on behalf of Women's Centre.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I'm speaking on behalf of my colleague Angela Everson, who works across the pond to Together Women. I've known Angela for many years. Angela is the CEO at Women's Centre, which primarily works in Kirklees, Calderdale and Bradford. They're a one-stop shop kind of holistic support services for women and children. Angela's organisation, Women's Centre, for over 25 years has been really embedded in service delivery and has been at the heart of kind of support services for women and girls, particularly around domestic abuse and CSE. And I know her organisation has lobbied hard for many years and raised kind of the awareness around the issues around domestic abuse and CSE and how that affects not just the women but the wider kind of families and children and society. They do some amazing work in terms of kind of health, well-being, confidence, self-esteem, and access to kind of training and all sorts of various groups and one-to-one support activities, including kind of counselling around for women who have experienced particular trauma. Angela's organisation is a medium-sized organisation, very much like Together Women within this partnership. They have over 70 staff members, a senior management team. They have a turnover of around 1.2 million. And again, her organisation is very much embedded in being supported by volunteers, local volunteers who have a real kind of vested interest in the work that Angela's organisation does. In terms of kind of one of the real positives, and again, some of the kind of CEOs have mentioned and around funding that's been a challenge, but actually it's been a real positive for Angela's organisation, and I think this is a testament to how kind of embedded they have been within the CSE kind of agenda. So the positives for Angela was that the partnership has really enabled the development of a common call for action and a clear shared narrative. So Women's Centre have been able to use this in their local influencing work, which contributed to them successfully securing an extension to their local authority contract that is now funding an additional caseworker to sit and work alongside the stage worker that Angela's organisation has. And this is really evident of an organisation that has been around and delivering services locally in this agenda, but that being part of this wider partnership has really enabled them to have a kind of wider influencing voice and actually has resulted in commissioning of a service locally so that they're able to continue delivering that. Thank you.
Rokaiya, thank you. Joanna, Moya, Laura, thank you as well. I hope everyone sort of found that. I think just being able to hear all of your different perspectives, different experiences and then how that's relevant to kind of the stage partnership overall is incredibly helpful. Apologies, you may have noticed we briefly lost my colleague Heather. Hoping that I think she's having Wi-Fi issues, but hopefully will rejoin us. But in the meantime, I'll speak on both of our behalves. So hopefully from our stage partners presentations, you will have got a sense of the fact that the lessons from their experiences aren't only important and relevant for informing their legacy and their work together, but also hold learning for others wanting to embark upon and support similar partnerships and collaborations. I'm just going to share my screen for you now. There we go. So what I just briefly wanted to touch upon before we move into a Q&A, and you'll have an opportunity to pose your specific questions for the stage partnership. Please, I would encourage you to continue to post your questions into the chat as I'm talking, if there are particular things that the presentations have prompted for you already. But I just wanted to share a few reflections first on what we think this means for wider learning around collaboration and partnership working, specifically for those thinking about forming partnerships and collaborations, but also for those encouraging and supporting collaborations and partnerships, including funders. And finally, for encouraging and facilitating better partnership working between larger and smaller organisations. One of the things that really interested us as IVAR coming into this piece of work was that, because I think unfortunately a lot of the stories that prevail around partnerships, particularly between larger and smaller organisations, are those that are often the negative stories. You don't get to hear enough of the stories like these that are ones of success, but at the same time are also very open and honest about sharing some of the challenges of doing that work. And that's what you will have seen and heard from stage partners already. There have been tremendous successes in the work that they've done, but it hasn't been without its challenge. And what's particularly rich about the learning that they've shared is that they've been also very open and honest about the challenges they faced and the measures they've tried to put in place to counter those. So in terms of, for those thinking about collaborating or forming partnerships, one of the things we've seen from stage and we know is incredibly important for any partnership working is that it needs to take place at every level. So it needs to be at delivery, operational and strategic level. In the case of the stage partnership, structures and opportunities to collaborate were put in place at each of these levels. And that was important not only for the identification of joint actions, but also for staff within the individual organisations to be able to build and maintain relationships with each other at a range of levels. So as Rokaiya alluded to, many of these organisations had worked together before over a long period of time, but it was an opportunity for other staff and other individuals within their organisations to also form those relationships. The other really important aspect of that was that there was meaningful buy-in at a senior level from the start. Which was essential for each organisation in terms of building institutional rather than just individual links. Also, not to go into detail on this one because I think Rokaiya's example kind of illustrated it perfectly, but having a shared ethos and confidence in the quality and integrity of each other's services was really the kind of red thread that ran throughout, and that when the partnership hit upon trickier points, enabled them to overcome some of those challenges because they knew and had confidence in the fact that they were all striving towards the same end goal, and had trust in the integrity and quality of how that was being delivered. And what it means in a partnership is that you're able to balance both those individual and collective interests. And in this case, it is a delivery in year one of that partnership. Thirdly, this mutual appreciation and understanding of skills within the partnership. So A Way Out mentioned this as well, the fact that it was about having a partnership that was made up of organisations of different sizes, but actually what was most important was what sat beneath that. And it was trying to not get too hung up on the fact that we are 6 organisations of varying sizes in this room, some with more resource than others, and actually looking at it as a collective and thinking, well, as a group of however many individuals, what is the skills and resource that we bring to this, and how can we best draw on each other's strengths within that? And that remained the focus point throughout. Accountability and governance structures within any partnership and collaboration is often the trickiest thing to get right and to have discussions around. And certainly, I think Stage would agree that they were no exception. I think the learning from Stage was that there was a lot of organic development of these structures, and the co-design opportunity to co-design those structures together was really appreciated. What was perhaps challenging was that there hadn't been sufficient organising principles from the start, and so it meant that at points there was sometimes a bit of ambiguity and lack of clarity around decision-making processes, particularly in kind of relation to perhaps strategy and sharing of power. And Laura has very openly said that as the larger partner, getting that balance right as well can be incredibly tricky, because as the larger organisation you have that resource and that ability to bring those expertise to the partnership and give more time, but equally doing that in a way that is still ensures equality and parity of voice within that partnership can be tricky. And the last 2 points I just wanted to make were around regular review. One of the reasons that Changing Lives approached us about this piece of work was in recognition of the fact that they wanted an opportunity for partners to be able to pause and reflect on the partnership process. They felt that the journey that the Stage partnership had been on was one that was really important to track and to try and understand better. For the Stage partnership itself, but also because there was some really rich and important learning for others thinking about collaboration and partnership working. In all cases, though, I think we know that partnerships need to give themselves this time to step back and review. Partnership working is always challenging, and it can feel incredibly messy. And I think having these check-in points, using whatever structures the partnership already has in place, so whether that's partnership or steering group meetings, and ensuring that there are reflection points built into those is a really key point to just be able to kind of surface some of the trickier issues and talk those through, and also to be able to celebrate success and chart the journey travelled. And finally, linked to that is the importance of creating safe space and openness. So effective collaborative working requires partners to be able to be upfront about their perspective and their views and their feelings. This can be incredibly emotional work, not just the actual work that the organisations are doing in terms of the field they're working in, but the process of working in partnership and collaborating can be incredibly emotional. So it's really important to recognise this and create opportunities and space for people to express frustrations and talk through openly how to overcome them. And in the case of Stage, what we saw was that disagreements were generally seen as constructive and as a safe space to learn, and that's how they approached that one. So I'm very pleased to see I've got Heather back with me. So I'm now going to pass over to Heather for the next slides.
Thank you, Katie. I hope I remain with you, and I will be relatively short so that if something untoward happens with my Wi-Fi, you're not held up by my sudden disappearance. I have moved elsewhere to get good Wi-Fi connection, so I do apologise everybody for that. Anyway, I'm going to talk initially about how other organisations, commissioners, funders, perhaps, infrastructure bodies encourage and support collaboration, and some of the learning from that perspective from the Stage partnership. And one of the first observations is that there is a tendency sometimes to think in terms of a partnership working on the same area of service delivery, that you need to think about scaling up what your model is. And we observed in the early interviews that smaller organisations expressed one of their fears being coming into a partnership with larger organisations, and one very large organisations, that they would just get sucked up. And that was a real fear. As the partnership progressed, it became very clear that fear had been allayed in very early stages of the partnership. There was a real appreciation, as people have expressed across the piece in introducing their organisations, that their specific expertise was valued across the partnership. So I think the learning is scaling up doesn't mean that everybody has to do the same thing. Replication doesn't mean that you need exactly the same model on the ground. And perhaps in this instance, it helped that the partnership came together with a theory of change, which of course, one of the advantages of the theory of change, it does facilitate a more flexible approach, because the ultimate goal of doing right by the women using the services, and that shared ethos, was what drove it. A second point of learning is about realistic timescales. And I'm sure we've all talked about this before, that when partnerships are coming together, it can take time. The storming and forming and so on is important, but it takes time. In this case, the bid for Tampen tax funding was announced in the December and was due in just a month later. So there was a very short period of time to get things together. And people did feel that meant that in the early days, it was quite hard because they were having to do all of that partnership development, as well as hit the ground running with service delivery. And it's to the credit of the stage partners that they achieved that. So where you want to see partnerships form, being realistic about the fact that that can take time and resource at the outset. And then finally, facilitate cooperation, not competition. I think the partners have made this very clear, that they do value the different skills and expertise, including the very unique local routes that some of the partners bring to the table, of a real understanding of how delivery needs to work in their areas. And it's to Changing Lives credit that they really value that as well. And I think Laura said that the organisation has a belief in a thriving and diverse voluntary sector, and that's certainly played out in this partnership. Moving on to the issue of larger and smaller organisations in partnership. Being small doesn't mean bringing less value. That's been made very clear by everybody. But capacity will inevitably be more limited. And the partners have talked about that, how that means a kind of constant rebalancing of engagement of everybody, equal participation, but people not having equal resource. And so Laura's talked about that requiring listening and discussing and acting with responsibility in terms of their power constantly throughout the partnership. That follows neatly to honest conversation about the impact of size of an organisation on a partnership. And larger organisations needing to understand and acknowledge their power. I think that Laura has really said it all in terms of that, and certainly the feedback from other partners is that there have been difficulties, there's been challenges, there's been times when people have felt that, particularly in the early days, that there wasn't equal participation, but people have worked at it. and changing lives. And other larger partners within the partnership have constantly been mindful and listened and watched their behaviours. And finally, it's quite clear in this example that larger organisations can use their capacity to include and enhance the value of smaller partners. And one of the big prizes here is not just in terms of delivering really important and quality services and using the learning from each other to constantly develop and improve those services, but also to challenge the systemic problem that there is in across the country by being able to influence because of the resources present in a larger partner. So I think that's all I want to say. Just, I suppose, one final thing is there's a lot of motherhood and apple pie spoken about partnerships. And just to share with you that when we did our first draft of the final report, there was a resounding response that we'd been far too positive and that it was really important that we shared that it hadn't all been a garden of roses. And that a big part of the learning is that people needed to constantly work at the relationship and the partnership and have done so underpinned by that shared ethos and commitment.
Heather, thank you, and thank you to all of our presenters. I think that leads us very nicely actually into the kind of question and discussion final portion of this session. You have the opportunity, you've got 4 of the stage partners here with you today. As Heather says, they've been incredibly open and honest about sharing the learning from their experiences. So I'd really encourage you to kind of do pose your direct questions to them in relation to your own experiences and things that you'd like to learn more about. But perhaps if I can start us off, one question for all of you, I think, that has come through. So if you were to enter into a similar kind of partnership again, what might be one thing that you would do differently based on what you've learned through the experiences of this partnership? Laura, Moya or Rokaiya, I don't know if either of you want to go first on that, but one thing that you might do differently knowing what you know now. Moya.
Oh,
there you are.
I did myself off mute. I think certainly for me, there's something to be said about creating partnerships prior to a funding opportunity. So you've got that time to sort of build those relationships and to have discussions and what have you. I mean, it just, you know, it wasn't possible in the situation that we were in to do that. But certainly moving forward, I think now that we've got this strong partnership, if I were to moving into partnerships with others, I'd want to sort of be thinking about that ahead of time. So just bringing organisations together like we have that have very similar ethos and the work that we do, and think about how we might like to work together on the basis that when and if a funding stream became available that we could go for, all of those things would already have been discussed and resolved to a certain degree.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any others like to come in on that one? Laura?
I think, I mean, Heather touched on this, that our sort of, in some ways, our decision-making processes and our sort of strategic thing, the way we work has evolved, but it really wasn't in place at the start. And I think there was a real gap there. And we managed that really quite quickly. But I think thinking about that more from the start, I think from my perspective, we felt uncomfortable sort of imposing something, but actually we didn't need to. But you know, we didn't actually have a sort of explicit sort of coming together as us as leaders of this in our early plans, and very quickly we did. But I think without being incredibly prescriptive, having more of a sense of the governance and realising how important that is a real learning for me personally, and I think for changing lives.
Thank you. Rokaiya.
Yeah, and I think Laura took the words out of my mouth. That was exactly kind of what I was going to say. So I think very early doors, it was with the good intention of trying to bring everybody on board and it be a really collaborative kind of decision-making process approach. I think that certainly Changing Lives were very keen not to be very prescriptive around governance, decision-making, the structure, and that we wanted people to kind of feel sort of engaged, but actually, whilst that did work, but it was a bit of something that we had to kind of wade through ourselves to kind of eventually get there and get right, and probably took a lot more time. And so I guess if those kind of structures were put in place, still with, and I think that is possible to do that at very early doors, still with the kind of intention of being collaborative, inclusive, supportive, and all of that. But I think it is really important to have those kind of set in place early doors.
Okay. Thank you, Rokaiya. Joanna, did you want to add anything on that?
No, just similar things really. I think the start point is key. I think the reality is for a lot of funding, or it appears that we don't have a lot of running time to do some of that work, and I think that is key. It's you know, we need that time to develop that partnership, to have that understanding, to understand the practicalities of the contracting requirements and compliances. So that would be what I would be wanting moving into any partnership, that time to gain that understanding.
Thank you. I can see we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Joe, I don't know if you'd like to unmute and ask your question yourself, or I'm happy to pose it for you. There you are, Joe. Would you like to pose your question?
Hi everybody, thank you for such a great event, and I really love the fact that you haven't just talked about the positives of partnership working. I'm Jo Costello, I work at Women's Aid Federation, so spend a lot of time either working in partnerships ourselves or supporting our members, and often have this imbalance. And we also worked on a fairly large scale partnership funded by Lloyds in conjunction with IMCON, the second tier Federation for Black and Minoritized Women's Services, which is probably the reason for my question, I think, today, thinking about the challenges that we at Women's Aid went through with regards to whiteness, white privilege, and what that looks like. So I have posted the question in the chat, so I'm just going to read it out as I've posted it. So I've said, as all of the partners, as far as I can see, are white-led organisations, can I ask what work you did around challenging white privilege, racism, and ensuring that all of your work was from an anti-racist perspective? And I'm thinking really reflectively based on the recent Anti-Racism Involved Charter, which will require our work to be and look different than it has done previously in order for us to be able to unpick that whiteness. So interested in the panel's thoughts.
Joe, thank you. Anyone would like to come in first with a response there? Moya? Yeah, Moya, then Laura.
Yes, I think it is. It's an issue that we have discussed at great length within the Stage Partnership, and have developed a paper around this and about how we can, moving forward, reset the balance, if you like, around some of these issues. It was something that we recognised through looking at the demographics of who we were working with, that we weren't working with as many women from Black and different minority backgrounds as we could be. So it is something that we've been talking about quite a lot, and looking at addressing some of that. You know what you want to say?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's something we've been very much aware of, and one of the things we made sure of is the influence group includes things like our partners from the Angelou Centre and a number of leaders of women of colour, because it's a real issue, and really understanding as organisations what it is about us, where we're not reaching out to enough women from Black and minoritized ethnicities. And I think it's really complex is what we're finding, and so we're doing a lot of work on that. And I think for us, this is the absolute central point, and our sort of the centre of our bid for our next funding is to explore this further, because I think there's so many more barriers. One of the things that has come up, which was really interesting, I think, with a lot of us in the partnerships, is saying that in the current kind of contract culture, everything we do is very prescribed, and there's a real kind of pressure. And when I mean, I'll speak for us at Changing Lives. 10, 15 years ago, when we set up the service, we kind of had the freedom and capacity to really start to build relationships in the community, because we can't just sit here and go, come to us, it doesn't work like that. And I think there's something that funders and commissioners need to understand as well, that we need that capacity without sort of having really prescriptive sort of targets and this driven culture around how we properly embed ourselves in communities and make sure we're reaching out. And give women the choice make sure there's choice. So I think it's a really important point, and I think it's very complex on many levels. So yeah, this is something we're really keen. We're very happy to share our paper, which I have to say is pretty challenging on ourselves. But yeah, we'd be very happy to share that if people are interested to look at what we're doing and what we plan to do around this.
Thank you, Laura. Rokaiya, did you want to?
Yes, yeah. So thank you, Jo, for that question, because actually it's really relevant. And I think it's two things really. It's looking at us as organisations, first of all, and then service delivery. So actually, I'm acutely aware that within this partnership and many partnerships at a CEO level, I'm often the lone kind of face of colour. And it's evident in this partnership as well. And I think we collectively, organisations, leaders, really need to look inward in terms of our own organisations and people in more senior roles, because actually, if we want to be really, we talked a lot, didn't we, about collaborativeness and inclusiveness and shared kind of strategic decisions and all of that. But that has to span not just, that has to span much wider in terms of kind of who the people are around in those positions. And there's kind of, stark kind of differences in many organisations, and there's a real lack of particularly women of colour in senior positions. We were also, as a partnership, acutely aware of this agenda of CSE and what the narrative in the world out there is in terms of that kind of race imbalance. And we were really keen, and we did discuss it at kind of many meetings around not falling into that trap of that kind of rhetoric narrative around kind of the, how people view CSE and the different cultures within that. And so I think that we still have a lot of work to do, I feel, in that area. And I think that is acknowledged through kind of this partnership. And we have produced a paper, and it goes some way to addressing. But I think there's a lot more that we need to do to kind of really get it right.
Thanks very much, everybody. Really appreciate your honesty and reflectiveness.
Thank you, Jo, for the question. We've got another great question from Jackie around those supporting collaboration and working. Jackie, I don't know if you wanted to unmute and ask your question yourself. There you are. Hello.
Hi, thank you. Really useful event. I think it's so rare that we get any focus on the realities of partnership working. So it's really good to hear from all the speakers. And I think the discussion we've just had has been incredibly important as well. I work for Clinks. I'm the Clinks Women's Network coordinator. And it's something, working towards becoming an anti-racist organisation is something that Clinks is committed to at the moment. And I think, you know, for my role in the women's sector, it's really important that we bring a bit of a forensic approach to this, really. So before I ask my question, just to say, Clinks has recently appointed a role that is similar to mine, and we're setting up a race and criminal justice network. So I'm going to be working closely with my colleague Janice Fraser to look at that intersection between race and gender. Anyway, so my question was just very much, I think I heard that one of the speakers mentioned the need for infrastructure support organisations to help, you know, foster better collaboration, partnership working. So my question is, what do you think Clinks can do? You know, what should Clinks be doing to support better partnerships in the sector?
Thank you, Jackie. Great question. Any of the partners like to come in first? Joanna, were you leaning forward? I was conscious I keep coming to you last as well, so I'll come to you first. Joanna.
I think in terms of what we've said already, I think, Jackie, it's around the fact that if you at Clinks are able to support some of the pre-discussion work of potential partnerships moving forward, and I think you've done some of that in terms of the dynamic framework and the women's lots and so on, that actually that's really important for us to actually then be able to, as a small charity, have some support to do some matching with a larger charity when moving forward for opportunities, or to enable a smaller charity to, as a specialism, move forward with a larger charity, because we wouldn't have had the capacity to do so on a numerous funding opportunities without partnerships, the larger partnerships.
Joanna, thank you. Really helpful insight, particularly from the smaller organisation of the partnership. Rokaiya.
Yeah, so Jackie, I think the work that you have mentioned that Clinks are doing around kind of race and equalities, it sounds absolutely brilliant, and I think kind of much needed within the sort of sector. So I think that's absolutely brilliant, and I know that many organisations hopefully will kind of benefit from what comes from that. I think Clinks are really great in terms of a lot of what you do. So you provide the opportunities for discussion, collaboration. I think you also provide opportunities, and I'm seeing a lot more of that more recently, opportunities for discussions around kind of topics, if you like, that are relevant. I guess in terms of thinking about sort of my organisation, you know, there's a lot that Clinks do in terms of infrastructure support for CEOs at a much higher level. I'm just wondering, sometimes the middle management, people who are often our emerging leaders, aren't there, that I wonder whether we need to invest a little bit more in kind of collaborative opportunities for them. I'd love to see that a lot more, and I know certainly my kind of senior management team have very little opportunities to do that on a grander scale than I do, unless it's something that we kind of do internally, if you like, with kind of local organisations. So I think that would be something that would really benefit them, and I think that would play to the kind of responsibility for organisations around kind of ensuring that more diverse women are able to move up into those kind of CEO roles, I think, and particularly focuses around kind of, you know, different communities, cultures and all of that. So that'd certainly be something that we would really value.
Thanks, Rokaiya. That's enormously helpful. That's a really useful steer. I think some people know we ran a pilot capacity building programme last year, part of which was for emerging leaders, and I'd really love to do more of that. So thank you, that's very helpful.
Thank you, Jackie, for the question. Really great question. One more question for all of you, I think, which sort of brings us potentially to a close, although do please, if anyone's got any remaining questions, do feel free to unmute or pop your questions in the chat. But it's a question around what next. So I know that the Stage Partnership itself has intentions to hopefully continue the work that it's already doing. And as individual organisations, you have already kind of been thinking through and forming other collaborations. So I'd be really interested to hear all of your thoughts on kind of your hopes for what next for the partnership. Who would like to go first? Moya.
Yeah, I think my hopes are certainly that we do manage to get some more funding so that we can continue this amazing work, because it's really important. And I think also, you know, we don't want to be, we know that it needs to be long term, and we don't want to be letting women down having started something. But also wider than that, I would say that whatever happens, I think because of this partnership, there will be opportunities in the future for us to work together. And I think the strength of the partnership should not just be on the basis of the work that we're doing now, that we can see that we can bring a lot to the table, and we can influence to make change. So I would like to see that continue in whatever shape or form, whatever the future brings.
Thank you, Moya. Any other? Laura?
No, okay, you go first.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously kind of completely echo what Moya has just said, but prior to this partnership, I knew some of you, and I kind of didn't know others very well, and I think that I've really valued the kind of just the shared togetherness that sometimes CEOs don't ever really get the opportunity for, and that could just be discussion, support, and I kind of really valued that, and I hope that that is something that we will. Of course, there'll be opportunities to work together and funding and all of that, but for me, I see it much more beyond kind of the funding bit, and there's some real value around togetherness at the kind of CEO level that I really value and have certainly valued, and I'd like to kind of continue.
Thank you, Rokaiya. Laura or Joanna? Laura?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah.
I totally echo that. I think that was one of the things we sort of wanted to capture in some ways, because at the beginning it was like, although it was really challenging, we were like, something really profound is happening here that, I think will change us all as organisations in our partnerships going forward. I feel worried, I guess, that we've had this experience because of the tampon tax fund, because it's a large fund, and I'm really delighted that some of our colleagues in the women's sector, including Together Women, have been successful in the next round. And I know the fund has been very controversial over the years, and I'm not going to go into that now, and I totally understand all of that. But whilst a lot of funders, and there's a lot talked about, we need partnership, we need collaboration. Actually, it's more, it therefore means that there needs to be, just really frankly, more, a larger pot of money. And I'd really urge sort of funders to actually genuinely come together and make that a bit easier for the sector, because unless we do that, we've discovered through this partnership so many things that we thought we experienced on our own, that actually we suddenly were like, oh, this is shared. This is actually bigger than just us. So an example would be, I think, as Changing Lives, we realise that, that sometimes we can be quite excluded from things like serious case reviews because we're not a statutory service. And we wondered if that was because of particular sort of tensions in a relationship, locally or whatever. And actually, this was an experience that every one of the partners, this is really serious when we're voluntary sector organisations who see people, we tend to be the ones with a relationship and maybe seeing someone every day or, really frequently, have a lot to contribute. Being excluded And that's not just down to one organisation. This is a systemic thing that's happening within the sector. And without having this kind of partnership where we can come together, and that's just one example, we don't know that, and we can't raise and we can't influence and we can't sort of, you know, work towards that level of social change, social justice. So I think, you know, I'm not trying to sort of do a moan for funding at all, but I think this is something that really needs to be considered. Just very quickly, we're actually, because of COVID, we did get a bit of an extension with our funding from DCMS, which was brilliant. We will be having a real, it would be in Westminster, I think, but trying to have a real sort of political influencing event coming up in sort of May, June time, just around the key headlines that we've found as a partnership. So our sort of influencing work will continue as well.
Laura, thank you. Joanna.
Yeah, I think it's, again, following on from what other people said, it's the importance of the influence in what we can carry on. I think that's going to be key. You know, we're at a moment in time in history where we need to keep on pushing forward around violence against women and girls.
Thank you. Heather, do you want to just unmute and say your comment, your response to Laura in the chat?
Thank you. Yes, it struck me that a number of the organisations involved in the partnership did benefit from Corson Alliance funding. And that, of course, was a funder alliance. A lot of charitable trusts are really interested in this and in the impact that this kind of partnership can make, but their budgets are relatively small. So there's something about funders collaborating. It's great the work that Lloyd's are doing, saw that in the chat, but influencing commissioners and funders and government to look at perhaps shared pots which can fund bigger partnership work is really important.
Heather, thank you. And I think that's a kind of a good point for us to close on, really. And I would urge the same. You know, I think IVAR has felt really privileged to have the opportunity to work with the stage partners and to learn from their experiences as well. We do a lot of different work on partnership and collaboration, and as others have alluded to, it isn't often the case, though, that you get partnerships that are really kind of willing to put themselves out there and share the learning from their experiences in the way that the stage partners have. So we really appreciate that. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with them. And I would just encourage others on this call, funders, infrastructure bodies and those alike, to similarly, please do go away and read the report. I think Natalie's posted a link to it in the chat, but also please do come back to the stage partners and use them as a reference point. And I'd encourage you to kind of be in touch with them and use them to help you in your thinking about what kinds of funding are needed to support these types of collaboration. So thank you very much for that. Just to draw your attention to as well in the chat, so NCVO and others have been doing some parallel work looking at called Rebalancing the Relationship, looking at partnerships between larger and smaller organisations specifically. Nick's also posted a link there to the case studies for that, which include the stage partnership as well. So do have a look at that as well. So I will close this there and give you all about 5 minutes back of your day so you can go and make a cup of tea before your next Zoom call. But thank you all so much for being with us here today. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here, to share your thoughts and your questions with us. And thank you in particular to our presenters from Stage and to Women's Centre and A Way Out, who couldn't be with us here today, but whose insights very much fed into the discussion. Thank you.